When I walked into the courthouse that morning, people barely noticed me at first. Just another old man in a plain suit, shoulders a little stooped from the years moving slower than the world around him. My son sat confidently at the front with his lawyer, a man who looked far too smug for someone half his age. They whispered exchanged folders and pretended not to see me. But then something extraordinary happened. The clerk called my name, and the judge, a man I had never met before, looked up, froze completely, and the words slipped out of his mouth before he could stop himself. But he's alive. The entire courtroom fell silent. The lawyer dropped his pen. My son's jaw tightened, his eyes darting to the floor, refusing to meet mine. For a moment, no one knew how to breathe. You see, according to the papers filed by my own son, I had been declared dead 2 weeks earlier. According to him, I had already been buried, mourned, erased. He had presented death certificates, medical reports, and all the legal proof anyone could possibly need to close the chapter on my life. But there I was, standing in front of them, breathing heart-beating voice, ready to speak for myself. And that moment, that frozen courtroom, was the day everything changed. My name is Thomas. I am 71 years old. Until a few months ago, I thought I was living the quiet, ordinary days of a widowed man drinking morning coffee in the same chipped mug my wife once used, tending to the roses she planted, keeping a low profile in a neighborhood where no one really pays attention to old men anymore. But that day I realized I was not invisible. That day the whole world saw me again, because my own blood had tried to bury me alive, on paper, in the law, in everyone's eyes, just to steal what I had built with my bare hands. Now tell me, how does a son decide his father is worth more dead than alive? How does blood turn so cold? Would you ever imagine your own child standing in a courtroom, smiling as strangers declare you gone forever? If you believe betrayal doesn't cut as deep as a knife, wait until you see your son's signature on your death certificate. That's the wound no blade could ever match. They wanted me erased, but instead I stood there as living proof of their lies. I was breathing, my voice was steady, my steps were slow but firm, and I said the only words I could muster in that moment. Your Honor, I am not dead. The silence that followed those words will stay with me until the day I truly am gone. Every face in that room turned pale, every whisper died in their throats, and I could feel the weight of shock pressing against the walls. No one knew the truth yet. No one knew how my own son had betrayed me, how he had woven this elaborate fraud to seize what wasn't his. But they were about to. And as I stood there looking at him, at the son I had raised, sacrificed for, and trusted with my legacy, I asked myself the question that still echoes in my mind. Why? Why would my son rather see me dead than see me alive? If you've ever felt betrayed by someone you loved, if you've ever seen trust shatter before your eyes, then you know this story isn't just mine. It's every parent's nightmare. So, let me take you back. Before the courthouse, before the lies and the forged papers, to a time when trust still existed, when love still meant something. Only then will you understand how shocking it was to walk into that room and hear the judge whisper in disbelief, "But he's alive." So, if you've ever wondered what true betrayal looks like, stay with me. This is not just the story of a father and a son. This is the story of how dignity can be stolen and then reclaimed, how justice can be buried and then dug back up by the very man they tried to erase. And I want to ask you right now, what would you do if your own child tried to declare you dead while you were still breathing? Comment 1, if you believe no betrayal cuts deeper than that, or just like this video, if you think no child should ever go that far. Because trust me, the story is only beginning. Before betrayal turned my life into a courtroom spectacle, there was once a time when I believed my son was the best thing I had ever created in this world. His name is Daniel. To me, he wasn't just my child. He was my second chance at life, after years of struggle, a reason to work harder, to live longer, to dream bigger. You see, when you grow up with nothing, every meal you put on the table for your child feels like victory. Every pair of shoes you buy for him feels like redemption. I was never a rich man. I spent my youth breaking my back in construction sites, lifting bricks until my shoulders burned, patching concrete under the summer sun, repairing roofs in the middle of the winter. My hands were cracked and calloused, but I told myself every blister was an investment in my son's future. I married young, too young perhaps, but I loved my wife with the kind of love that doesn't fade even after death. Margaret was her name, and she had a laugh that could soften the hardest day. She wanted a home, a family. And when Daniel came into our lives, I thought we were complete. Every photo of his childhood still sits in an old leather-bound album. His first steps were on the kitchen floor. I tiled myself. His first words were spoken in the little living room where we ate soup together on nights when money was thin, but love was plenty. He was our pride. I swore to Margaret and to myself that no matter what it cost me, Daniel would go further than I ever did. He wouldn't spend his life under the sun breaking stones. He would wear clean shirts, go to college, and stand tall in rooms I was never allowed to enter. There were nights when I came home so exhausted I could barely move, but Daniel would run to me with his school drawings and I'd lift him up with what little strength I had left. "You're my hero, Dad," he used to whisper. And those 4 words carried me through decades. When he graduated from high school, I sold my old truck just to help pay his tuition. When he wanted an apartment closer to campus, I took a second job cleaning offices at night. I never told him how much I struggled. I just wanted him to believe the world was safe, that his dreams were possible. And for a time, I believed he was grateful. On Sundays, he and Margaret would cook together, filling the house with smells of roasted chicken and baked bread. On holidays, he'd sit at the piano, playing songs he learned by ear while we sang along. He was not just my son, he was my best friend. Margaret used to smile and say, "Thomas, one day you'll see, he'll take care of you the way you took care of him." And I believed her. I trusted that the love we poured into him would come back when we needed it most. When Margaret passed cancer, taking her faster than I ever imagined possible, Daniel held my hand at the funeral. He squeezed it and said, "Don't worry, Dad, I'll never leave you." In that moment, even through my grief, I thought at least I wasn't alone. I thought I had a son who would protect me as I grew old the way I had protected him all his life. Life after her death became a ritual of memory. I woke up at 6, brewed coffee in the same mug she once drank from, tended to the roses she planted by the porch. I sat in silence in the evenings, listening to the house breathe around me. Daniel would visit sometimes, bringing groceries, sometimes just himself, and those small gestures meant more than gold. They were proof I thought that love had survived the grave, that Margaret's prophecy had been true. If you had told me back then that one day he would stand in front of a judge and try to erase me with a signature, I would have laughed in your face. Daniel was the boy I carried on my shoulders, the man I celebrated at every milestone. He was the reason I endured the storms. How could such a son look at his father and see not a man, not a life, not a history, but only a bank account? But that's the cruelty of trust. It blinds you. It makes you believe loyalty is permanent, that blood is unbreakable. I didn't see the cracks when they first appeared, because I was too busy remembering the boy with the crayons, the young man at the piano, the grieving son at his mother's grave. I didn't want to see the truth forming behind his smile. And that is why the betrayal cut so deep. Because before the lies, before the forged papers, before the courtroom froze in silence, there had been love. Real, unquestionable love. That's what makes this story so painful and so universal. The deeper the love once was, the sharper the blade of betrayal becomes. So, tell me, have you ever trusted someone so completely that you couldn't imagine them turning against you? If you have, then, you know why my heart shattered when I learned what my own son was capable of. Comment 8. If you've ever felt that blind trust before, or hit like if you think loyalty within a family should be sacred, because from here the cracks begin to show and the story only gets darker. The signs were there long before the courtroom, but I refused to see them. Maybe it was love, maybe it was denial, maybe it was the foolish hope of an old man who wanted to believe his son was still the boy who once called him a hero. The first red flag came in small conversations, easy to dismiss if you weren't paying attention. Daniel would ask questions about the house, not about my health or my well-being, but about the property itself. "Dad, you ever think about how much this old place is worth?" He asked one Sunday afternoon, running his hand along the wooden banister that I had sanded and polished with my own hands decades ago. I thought he was just curious, but the way his eyes lingered calculating made my stomach twist. Then there were the visits that became less about me and more about what I owned. He would walk through the rooms as though inspecting them, commenting on repairs I hadn't made, hinting at renovations I couldn't afford. "You know, Dad, modern buyers want open kitchens now. These walls would have to go. Buyers." He used the word buyers. I laughed nervously, brushed it off, told myself he was only thinking out loud. But inside, something fragile started to tremble. Money began to disappear too. A small savings account that Margaret and I had built for emergencies showed unexpected withdrawals. When I asked Daniel about it, because I had foolishly added his name for convenience after his mother passed, he gave me excuses. "Oh, Dad, that was a mistake. I thought it was the joint account we use for bills." He smiled, kissed my cheek, and I swallowed the lie. I wanted to believe him. After all, what kind of son would steal from his own father? His tone toward me began to shift as well. Not outright cruel at first, but distant colder, laced with irritation I didn't recognize. When I forgot where I left my glasses, he would sigh and say, "Dad, you're getting forgetful. Maybe you need someone to help you with these things." When I struggled to carry groceries up the steps, he'd shake his head, muttering under his breath about how dangerous it was for me to be alone. It sounded like concern, but the words carried something else: judgment, dismissal. The first stones laid in a wall between us. One evening I overheard him on the phone. He thought I was asleep in the living room, but I had only closed my eyes for a moment. His voice was low, urgent. "Yeah, once it's official, everything transfers over. He won't even know. It'll look natural." I sat there in the dark, my heart hammering, unsure if I had heard correctly. Was he talking about me, about the house, about my life? When I walked into the hallway, he ended the call abruptly, forced a smile, and asked if I wanted tea. I said nothing, but the seed of suspicion had already been planted. Still, I pushed it away. Parents always want to believe the best of their children. I told myself he was stressed, that maybe marriage had changed him, maybe work had hardened him. He wasn't the boy at the piano anymore, but who stays the same. I excused every cold remark, every unexplained withdrawal, every calculating glance. I held on to memories instead of facing reality, and in doing so, I gave him more power than I realized. The biggest red flag came when he brought me documents to sign. "It's just for protection, Dad," he said, sliding the papers across the kitchen table. "If anything happens to you, this makes sure I can take care of everything without delay." The words were wrapped in silk, but the paper beneath my hands felt like chains. I skimmed the lines, not fully understanding the legal jargon, but the phrases jumped out: power of attorney transfer, of ownership, medical authority. My throat went dry. "Why now, Daniel?" I asked. His eyes flickered for a second before he smiled. "Because I love you, Dad. I don't want you to worry. I didn't sign that night." Something inside me screamed not to, though I couldn't explain why. Looking back, every warning was flashing in front of me like a red light on a deserted road, but I kept walking forward, blinded by loyalty. And that blindness was exactly what he counted on. He knew I would doubt myself before I doubted him. He knew that I would rather believe I was paranoid than believe my own son could betray me. And that is how betrayal works. It doesn't arrive with a trumpet or a scream. It seeps into small conversations, careless withdrawals, subtle changes in tone, until suddenly you're drowning in evidence you refuse to see. By the time I realized the water was rising, it was already up to my neck. So, I ask you, have you ever ignored the red flags because you loved someone too much to face the truth? Comment 9. If you know that feeling, or hit, like if you believe sometimes love can blind us more than hate ever could. Because in my case, those ignored signs didn't just lead to disappointment. They led to something darker, something unthinkable. They led to my own son filing the papers that declared me dead. The truth never knocks politely. It doesn't wait for you to be ready. It crashes through the door at the exact moment you think life is steady enough to stand on. For me, it arrived on a gray Tuesday morning, wrapped in a thin envelope that had been slipped under my front door. No return address, no explanation. Just my name written in hurried ink across the front, Thomas. At first I thought it was junk mail, maybe a misplaced bill. My eyesight isn't what it used to be. So I carried it to the kitchen, sat down with my glasses, and tore it open. Inside was a copy of a document that made my blood run cold. It was a death certificate. My death certificate. Name Thomas Williams. Date of death 2 weeks earlier. Cause of death, cardiac arrest. I sat frozen, reading it over and over, as if repetition would change the words on the page. But there it was, my life reduced to ink, my existence legally erased while I was still very much alive, breathing in that kitchen with the smell of stale coffee lingering in the air. At the bottom of the form was my son's signature. Daniel's handwriting clear as day, authorizing the notification of my death. My hands shook so violently I dropped the paper on the floor. I bent down to pick it up, and my reflection caught in the glass of the oven door. Alive. Wrinkled face, tired eyes, but alive. And yet on this paper, I was nothing but a statistic. Questions raced through my mind like fire. How had he done this? Why? Who else knew? Was the world already believing I was gone? My chest tightened, and for the first time in years, I felt fear clawing at me. Not fear of death. No, I had made peace with that long ago. But fear of being buried alive in silence, erased while still walking the earth, betrayed by the very blood I had protected all my life. I called Daniel immediately. My voice cracked as I asked, "Do you know anything about this?" There was a pause on the line, too long, too deliberate. Then he chuckled soft, but sharp. "Dad, you must be mistaken. You're tired. Probably looking at some old file. Don't stress yourself." His words were honey, but his tone was steel. He knew exactly what I had found. I hung up without another word, and that night I barely slept. I dug through old drawers, opened boxes Margaret and I had stored away. Somewhere I thought there must be something, papers, records, insurance policies that explained why he would go this far. And then I found it hidden inside a folder I hadn't touched in years. It was Margaret's handwriting, a letter she had left tucked between our will and the deed to the house. "Thomas," it began, "if you are reading this, then I am gone. I know you and I know Daniel. He is your pride, but he is also vulnerable to ambition. Promise me you will guard what we built. Promise me you won't let him take from you what we sacrificed for." Tears blurred my vision as I read those words. Margaret had seen the danger long before I did. She had felt it even as I clung to the image of Daniel as the perfect son. She had known, and she had tried to warn me from beyond the grave. The next morning, I went to the local clerk's office with the death certificate in hand. The woman behind the desk looked startled when I gave her my name. She typed, quickly checked records, and then her face went pale. "Sir," she whispered, "according to our system, you are deceased." I stared at her, waiting for her to laugh, to tell me it was a clerical error, but she didn't. She printed out the record, handed it to me, and said quietly, "Someone filed this, with official paperwork." There it was, proof. My son hadn't just toyed with my trust. He had already set the wheels in motion, pushing me out of existence legally so he could claim everything. And it wasn't speculation anymore. It was fact. My name, my life, my identity had already been stolen by the one person who was supposed to protect it. I left that office trembling, gripping the papers as if they were my last lifeline to the truth. My mind was a storm. I thought of the withdrawals, the inspections of my house, the phone call I had overheard. Suddenly, every red flag snapped into place, and the picture was clear. Daniel wanted me gone. Not just out of the house, not just out of his way. Gone, buried, erased. I went home and sat at the kitchen table until the sun went down, the documents spread out in front of me like a crime scene. Betrayal has a sound. Did you know that? It's the silence that follows the realization that the person you love most is the one who has cut you deepest. It's the hollow echo in your chest when you read your own death certificate while your heart is still beating. That night, I swore to myself that if Daniel wanted me dead on paper, then I would show him just how alive I truly was. I would walk into that courtroom, not as a ghost, not as a man to be erased, but as the father who had given him everything, and would not let him take a single thing more. So, tell me, what would you do if you held your own death certificate in your hands signed by your own child? Comment yes if you believe that betrayal is unforgivable or hit, like if you think no parent should ever have to see their child's signature on a document of their death. Because from this moment on, the fight had begun, and it was only going to escalate. The days after discovering my own death certificate were unlike anything I had ever lived through. Every morning, I woke up with the same question burning in my chest. If my own son had already declared me dead on paper, what would he do next to make that lie real? I couldn't shake the thought that I was walking through my house like a man on borrowed time. Every creak of the floorboards, every unfamiliar car that parked near the driveway, every unexpected knock at the door, it all felt like part of a countdown I could not control. Daniel, of course, wasted no time. He arrived 2 nights later unannounced, as always, his expensive shoes clacking against the tile floor like he already owned the place. He didn't bring flowers, he didn't even say hello. Instead, he carried a thick envelope under his arm and a smirk that chilled me more than any winter wind. "Dad," he said casually as if everything was normal, "we need to finalize some paperwork. It's for your own good." I studied his face. That was the problem with betrayal. You start searching for cracks, trying to see whether the person you once loved is still hiding somewhere beneath the lies. But Daniel's eyes were steel now, cold, merciless. He slid the envelope across the table. Inside were legal documents drawn up by some lawyer I'd never met, power of attorney forms, papers that would strip me of all decision-making rights, handing full control of my finances, my property, and even my medical care over to him. I looked him dead in the eyes. And if I don't sign? He chuckled, leaning back in the chair like a man who already knew the ending. Dad, you're tired. Everyone sees it. If you resist, we'll just have to go another route. Maybe a competency hearing. Doctors, judges. Once they see how forgetful you've become, how confused you get, sometimes they'll have no choice but to rule in my favor. Why make this harder than it has to be? His words cut deep. Forgetful, confused. Was this how he painted me to the world, as a senile old man fumbling through his last days, incapable of standing tall? My heart pounded with rage, but I forced my hands to stay steady on the table. I am not confused, I said slowly, and I will not sign. His smile faltered for the first time, and in that moment I caught a glimpse of the boy he used to be, the boy who once looked up at me with admiration instead of disdain. But just as quickly, the mask returned. Fine, he hissed. Then you leave me no choice. The escalation began that night. Phone calls from strangers started coming in, men who introduced themselves as buyers interested in the property. They wanted to walk through the house, take photos, measure walls. Each time I turned them away, but each time they grew more persistent. One even threatened to return with official documents proving the house was no longer mine. Then came the letters, thick stacks of envelopes filled with notices, inspections, offers of retirement homes, pre-approved for me, as if my life had already been packed into a box and shipped off. Neighbors began whispering. We heard you're moving soon, Thomas, they said kindly though. Their voices carried the undertone of gossip. Your son says the house is being sold. Sold. My house where I had built every memory, every sacrifice, every sleepless night after Margaret died. Sold like a used car with no thought of what it meant to me. But Daniel wasn't finished. The final blow came when I received a letter from the bank informing me that my accounts were under review due to irregular activity. I rushed to the branch only to be told that someone had filed a claim stating I was deceased and the bank was required to freeze access until the matter was resolved. In that moment, standing in the cold marble lobby under the fluorescent lights, I realized the war had already begun. Daniel was stripping me of everything, my house, my money, my identity, piece by piece, until nothing remained but the shadow of a man he could bury without ever digging a grave. I went home that evening trembling with fury, clutching the frozen bank statement in my hand. I stood in the living room, staring at Margaret's photograph on the mantel. What would you have me do? I whispered. How do I fight my own flesh and blood? But her eyes in that photograph seemed to answer calm and steady. You fight with dignity. You fight with truth. That night, I wrote down everything, every phone call, every document, every threat. I made copies of the death certificate, the bank letters, the power of attorney forms. I contacted an old friend, an attorney who owed me a favor, and for the first time, I began preparing not just to defend myself, but to strike back. The escalation wasn't just external anymore, it was inside me. The anger that had nearly crushed me now burned like fuel. For weeks I had been the victim, but now I felt something shift. The more Daniel pushed, the more he revealed just how far he was willing to go. And the more he revealed, the more I understood that I had a weapon he could never match: the truth of what he had done. And yet, part of me still broke. Every night before bed, I asked myself the same question. How did we get here? How did the boy I carried on my shoulders, the boy I taught to fish, the boy who once cried when he broke my watch, how did he become the man trying to bury me alive? But maybe that was the cruelest part of betrayal. It doesn't arrive with strangers. It comes from the people you raised, the people you trusted, the people you loved so much that you never thought they could sharpen a knife behind your back. So here I was, 72 years old, facing a war I never wanted, a war against my own son. He thought I would crumble. He thought I would bend. He thought the weight of his lies would crush me into silence. But he had forgotten one thing. I had already survived worse: war, poverty, the loss of my beloved Margaret, and every scar had only taught me one lesson. Dignity is the last thing a man has, and I would not surrender mine. So I ask you, if your own son tried to erase your very existence, would you give in, or would you fight? Comment 9 if you would fight with everything you have, or hit, like if you believe some battles are too painful to bear, because the escalation was far from over, and the storm was only beginning. The day of the courtroom battle arrived like a storm that had been building for months. I remember standing in front of the mirror that morning, tying the same black tie I had worn at Margaret's funeral. My hands trembled, not because I feared losing, but because I knew this was the moment when everything 40 years of sacrifice, trust, betrayal would be laid bare in front of strangers who would decide which of us was telling the truth. As I walked into the courthouse, the air itself seemed heavier. The marble floor echoed under my shoes, and every sound amplified the whispers of spectators, the scratching of pens, the shuffle of papers. I saw Daniel already seated at the plaintiff's table, dressed in a tailored suit that didn't suit him. His face was carved into a mask of self-righteous indignation, the kind that fools people who only look at the surface. Beside him sat a sharp-eyed lawyer, the kind who smelled blood and thrived on it. When our eyes met, Daniel smirked. It wasn't the smile of a son seeing his father. It was the grin of a predator who believed the hunt was already over. For a moment, my knees weakened. But then, I remembered Margaret's letter, her warning, and I straightened my back. If he wanted to bury me, he would have to do it while I stood tall. The hearing began. His lawyer painted a picture of me as a senile old man, incapable of handling my affairs. He spoke of memory lapses, of dangerous forgetfulness. He cited fabricated incidents, how I had supposedly left the stove burning, how neighbors had complained. I wandered at night confused how my own son had been forced to intervene to protect me from myself. Each lie hit like a hammer, but I clenched my jaw and stayed silent. I knew my turn was coming. Then they unveiled their trump card, the death certificate. My death certificate. They slid it across the table like a weapon. Your Honor. The lawyer said this unfortunate but necessary document was filed to protect Mr. Williams' estate. His son had no choice but to act when his father's condition deteriorated to such a dangerous degree. The courtroom buzzed, gasps, whispers. My death file, notarized, documented, was suddenly a piece of evidence against me. Daniel leaned back in his chair, hands folded as if the coffin lid was already nailed shut. And then it was my turn. My attorney rose calm but fierce and called me to the stand. I walked slowly, every step heavy with years, but when I faced the room, something shifted. I was no longer the fragile man they wanted me to be. I was Thomas Williams' husband, father, veteran, survivor. They questioned me, trying to trip me up with dates and numbers, hoping I would falter, but every answer came clear. They asked about my accounts, and I produced statements proving funds had been withdrawn without my consent. They asked about my memory, and I recited Margaret's favorite poem, word for word, a verse I had carried for decades. The courtroom grew silent as I spoke, my voice steady, my mind sharp. Then my attorney revealed what they had not expected. Margaret's letter, her warning written in her hand, foresaw this very betrayal. As the words were read aloud, I watched Daniel's face crumble, his smug confidence cracking like glass. Guard what we built. Her voice echoed in that room. Do not let ambition steal it from you. But the final blow was yet to come. My attorney called the county clerk to the stand, the very woman who had shown me the record. Under oath, she confirmed that the death certificate had been filed under Daniel's instruction with his signature and without my knowledge. Gasps rippled again through the courtroom. The judge leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Mr. Daniel Williams," he said sternly, "do you have any explanation for why you filed your father's death certificate while he is very much alive, standing before us?" For the first time, Daniel stammered. The words that once came so easily to him now tangled in his throat. I was only trying to protect him," he muttered, but the weight of evidence had crushed the mask he had worn for so long. The judge's gavel struck the desk. The sound cracked through the room like thunder. "Enough," he declared. "This court will not tolerate such manipulation. The attempt to strip a living man of his rights is an abomination. This case is dismissed, and all documents filed under false pretenses are null and void. Furthermore, this court will investigate the matter of fraud." The gavel struck again, and in that moment, justice was not just a word. It was a hammer falling on the lies that had nearly destroyed me. I turned to look at Daniel. His face was pale, his lips trembling. For years I had imagined that if this day came, I would feel vindicated, maybe even triumphant. But what I felt was heavier, the weight of a father's heartbreak. To see my son not as the boy I raised, but as the man undone by his own greed. Still, when I rose from the witness stand, the courtroom erupted in murmurs of respect. Strangers nodded to me as if to say, "You fought. You stood your ground." And for the first time in a long time, I felt that Margaret's spirit was standing beside me, proud that I had not let him bury me alive. "So, Tell me, what would you have done in my place? Would you have walked away, or would you have faced your betrayer in open court? Comment. Okay, if you believe no parent should have to fight their own child in such a way. Or hit. Like, if you think standing tall in front of lies is the only way to live with dignity. Because that day in that courtroom, I did not just win a case, I reclaimed my life. After the gavel fell and the courtroom emptied, I stepped outside into the cold afternoon light. The sky was heavy with clouds, but to me, it felt as if the air had cleared for the first time in months. I was alive, not just in body, but in name, in dignity, in law. My son had tried to erase me, to bury me while I still breathed, and yet here I was, standing taller than I thought possible at 72. Daniel walked past me without a word, his face pale and hollow. For a moment, I thought he might say something, an apology, an explanation, even just a whisper of regret. But his silence told me everything. He wasn't ready to face what he had done. And maybe he never would be. Watching him go, I felt the sharp edge of victory dull. It wasn't triumph that filled me, but sorrow. Because what does a man truly win when the price is losing his own blood? Still, there were consequences. The court launched a fraud investigation. The bank unfroze my accounts and apologized for their oversight. Neighbors who had once whispered in doubt now looked at me with newfound respect. I had not been packed away into a retirement home. I had not been erased. Instead, I had stood my ground and the world had seen the truth. In the weeks that followed, the silence of my house felt different. No longer a prison of fear, but a refuge. I walked through each room with new eyes, the walls painted by Margaret's hands, the chair where I had held Daniel when he was a boy, the table where countless meals had been shared. They were not relics of a life slipping away. They were monuments of survival. One evening, as the sun set and painted the kitchen gold, I sat with Margaret's letter in my hands. Her words had carried me through the storm, and now they guided me toward peace. Use this power not to hurt, but to protect and to teach. I thought about that line over and over. What did it mean to teach in the aftermath of betrayal? Could I show Daniel a lesson he was unwilling to learn? Or was the real lesson meant for me to understand that sometimes dignity means letting go of the ones who wound you deepest? Weeks turned into months. Daniel never came back. Rumors reached me that he had moved away, struggling under the weight of debt and the stain of his actions. I could have pursued him, legally could have ensured he paid for every forged signature, every lie. But I chose not to. Not out of weakness, but out of strength. Some punishments are best left to the quiet judgment of time. Instead, I focused on building something Margaret would have been proud of. I started volunteering at a local community center, counseling older men who felt discarded, invisible, betrayed by their families. I told them my story, not as a cautionary tale, but as proof that even when the people closest to you turn against you, dignity is not something they can take unless you surrender it. Slowly, I saw men who had arrived broken begin to stand straighter, to find their voices again. That more than anything felt like justice. And yet at night, when the house was quiet and the wind rattled the windows, I still thought of Daniel. A father's heart doesn't stop loving even when bruised, even when broken. It is a cruel paradox to love the person who tried to destroy you. But love is not the same as trust. And though my love for him remains my trust, was buried the day he filed my death. Years later, I still remember the moment the judge froze when he saw me alive in the courtroom, where I was supposed to be dead. It wasn't just shock. It was the power of truth colliding with lies, the undeniable proof that I was still here unbroken. That moment taught me the greatest lesson of my life. You cannot erase a man who refuses to let go of his own dignity. So now I ask you, what do you think? Should I have pursued revenge against Daniel, or was reclaiming my name and my peace enough? Comment 1. If you believe dignity matters more than punishment, or comment. Or 8. If you think betrayal this deep deserves harsher justice. Because in the end, justice is not always about what happens in court. Sometimes justice is waking up every morning, brewing your coffee, and knowing that you survived. Sometimes justice is looking at the mirror, at your wrinkled face and tired eyes, and whispering, "I am still here. I am Thomas Williams. They tried to erase me, but I lived, and that, my friends, is the truest victory of all."